This video is brought to you by Raceline Designs and A-Main Hobbies. Click the links in the description below. This is one of those videos that I've done prior, specifically with 10 scale, but I wanted to redo it in A scale because I think I could do a better job now, especially now that I can record in 60 FPS. In this video, I want to go over the classes commonly run outdoors in the modern RC racing world. There are 4 classes in total being run today on outdoor tracks for the most part, and in this video we're going to be delving into each one and talking about where they're usually run, what they're like, along with lightly going over their history. Before we begin, however, I'd like to welcome a new sponsor to the channel, Raceline Designs. Raceline Designs is a mobile hobby shop run by Tyrone Eccles and is based here in my home state of Georgia. He frequents a few tracks in this general area in the southeast, from tracks like Loganville RC Complex and the Barn RC Raceway mostly, to other tracks in this area like Easley RC Complex, SMB RC Raceway, Phil Hurd RC Raceway, and Cheehaw RC Raceway. Any large event being held in Georgia or lower South Carolina, and Raceline Designs will more than likely be there as well, like North Georgia Shootout, Wicked Weekend, or Peach Day Classic. Raceline Designs carries pretty much anything you need to keep your RC car going, from small things like spare wings and fuel tubing and tires, to big things like MKS servos, batteries, clutch parts for Nitro vehicles, and many other things that would take a while for me to list. And if you can't find it on the website, don't be afraid to DM him on Facebook, or better yet, come see him at any one of the tracks I mentioned prior during a race day. Also, feel free to check out rldrc.com and be sure to let Tyrone know that Roach sent you. Now then, let's begin. Even though Nitro Buggy isn't necessarily the oldest class I've mentioned in my previous videos, it is probably the most prestigious and watched class in RC today, at least in 8 scale. Nitro Buggies as a whole these days use a pretty tried and true design method that hasn't really deviated for the most part since Yuichi Kanai came out with the Burns and later Inferno all those years ago. Nitro Buggies always have a front, center, and rear diff filled with silicone oil, an electronics tray that holds both servos and a receiver box, and with the exception of the Agama N1, Nitro Buggies usually come with 2 shock towers front and rear, and they come with 4 shocks at each corner attached to the lower control arms and shock tower. If you're curious, the Agama uses a sort of cantilever system. Even though pretty much every buggy on the market follows this layout, there are some key differences between certain buggies on the market today. A really good example would be the Pillowball and C-Hub designs. I already did a video listing out every single A-scale buggy on the market today, save for Caster Racing Buggy, which I learned was a thing today. But if you don't feel like going through those 2 long videos, I'll keep it brief. The Pillowball cars use an upper and lower arm with 2 balls attached at each end. On those balls is a hub carrier that moves up and down in conjunction with the arms, sort of using said Pillowballs as a guide. Pillowball cars in the market today include, but are not limited to, the Mugen MBX8R, the Team Associated B4.1, the X-Ray XB8 when it feels like it, the WIRC SBX-2 and -3, and the S-Works S35-4 Evo. C-Hub use a traditional front and spindle hub carrier that you could see on a 10 scale 4-wheel-drive buggy. They tend to be more calm and easier to drive than Pillowball cars, if a bit slower sometimes. C-Hub buggies on the market right now would include the Kyosho MP10 TKI3, the HB Racing D8 Worlds Edition, the Techno NB48 2.1, the Mayako MX8, the Agama N1, the TLR8, the Serpent SRX8, and the Sparko F8 buggy. Lots of choices there. I'll cover a few more differences in the e-buggy section later. As for the propulsion of the Nitro buggy, we have the Nitro engine and its fuel. Race class Nitro engines for 8 scale buggies are always 0.21 cubic inches or 3.5 cc in displacement and run on a fuel known as nitromethane mixed with a bunch of other chemicals. There are many different types of Nitro engine fuel out there, specifically for surface RC cars, usually differing in nitro and oil content. The main ones I see used in the world of RC racing right now is Nitro Lux, Nitro Pro, TNR, and VP Racing Fuels. There are probably a lot more out there that I couldn't really find or remember off the top of my head, to be honest. The only really advice I have for picking a Nitro fuel would be go with the one that is most popular at your local club. For me, it was the Ryan Lutz 30% blend. Easy to tune for. Speaking of tuning and general engine maintenance, Nitro racing isn't for people who want instant gratification. There's a process for racing Nitro cars that needs to be adhered to if you want to, finish a race. First, there's the break-in process. Depending on what engine you happen to buy and what's been done to it during its construction, you'll need to break the engine in so it runs optimally. There are many different videos out there, mostly from Adam Drake, about how to tune a Nitro engine. To be honest, I had a whole segment dedicated to how to tune an engine, but there are so many ways people do it, I'm not even going to begin to go into that. Too many people waiting for me to slip up. Anyway, after said break-in process, there's a decent bit that goes into running and tuning an engine for specific temperatures and tracks as a whole that once again, I'm not going to go into for now. What I will say is that it's important to learn these things if you decide to run Nitro and want to succeed. And, even though I'm making it seem like Nitro is a lot of work, and trust me it can be, the reward you get for doing well in a 20 to 60 minute main is a serotonin rush equal to, I imagine, to getting the G-horn back in OG Destiny 1. Nitro, despite all of its head eggs and lack of instant torque from electric systems, is still one of the most rewarding and skill-building driving experiences you can have in RC. If you can do well with that class, you'll be on top of the world. Nitro Buggy, even in the modern day of RC, is the premier class of A-skill off-road racing, and luckily, I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. Now that we've gone over the most prestigious class, let's go over the most popular class in A-skill racing, E-buggy. Even though electric classes have always been a thing in the world of RC racing, for larger scale vehicles like A-skill buggies and electric motor technology simply wasn't at the point where it could push a larger vehicle with any form of fun factor. And then came brushless systems and LiPo battery technology. Not only did the new motors have the torque to push these larger buggies and trucks, the LiPo batteries they were paired with lasted longer and provided more power as well compared to the NIM batteries or NiCad batteries of old. With this technology, eventually people started making brushless conversion kits for A-skill Nitro racing buggies, and thus the E-buggy class as we know it was now a thing. Fun fact, Techno actually got its start by making E-buggy conversions for other vehicles before making their own in the late 2000s to early 2010s. Unlike the Nitro buggies in which they're based, E-buggies are actually quite heavy for their size. This is pretty much entirely due to the batteries and them being quite heavy. Unlike 10-scale buggies, trucks, and cars, which usually run on 2 cells worth of LiPos, 8-scale buggies usually run on 4 cells worth of LiPos. There are some exceptions to this rule, for example Fee Long or a little bump running a 3S setup on his Kyosho MP10E, but pretty much everyone else runs a 4S setup as that is typically the legal limit for 8-scale E-buggy racing. How exactly different buggies lay out their batteries is where things get a bit more interesting. Different manufacturers and racing companies have come up with quite a few different ways to lay out the battery. Going back to Kyosho again, the MP10E uses a pseudo saddle pack system where 2 batteries are laid out on the edges of the car to spread out the weight as wide as possible to improve the buggy's stability. Other buggies like the S-Works and Team Associated also use a saddle pack system, but keep the weight more inward to help rotation in corners. Other buggies like my HBE8 and the soon-to-be Mayako MX8E both use the standard battery on one side and electronics on the other. And lastly, buggies like the Mugen and Techno use shorty 4S batteries to keep the weight down and inward to help with corner speed. Which one you decide to go with entirely depends on what kind of driver you are and how good of a driver you are. If you're a really good driver, having a saddle pack system to help with corner rotation may be worth the instability. If you're like me and a lot more mellow of a driver, maybe a more standard car with a 4S battery or the Kyosho pseudo saddle pack system will work better for you in giving you a more stable car. Now remember when I said that E-buggy is more popular than Nitro buggy at the start of this segment? Well, there is a very good reason why this is, and that's simply because it's very easy to get into compared to Nitro as a whole. There's no tuning needed for an electric motor unless you start messing with the speed control settings, and in terms of accessories you need far fewer of them to get started. You don't need a heat gun, you don't need a starter box, clutch or clutch parts, or anything else like that. All you need is what makes the car go and you're set to race. The only issue with this is the fact that E-buggy doesn't get nearly as much hype from spectators. The mains are longer for Nitro cars due to the fact that they have actual pit stops, and there's generally a lot more going on behind the scenes for Nitro racing as a whole. Granted, because E-buggy is plug and play, it gives you more time to experiment with setup changes, but it still isn't the same as getting a Nitro buggy just right for your track. Also, because you can stop and fill up during a Nitro run, you tend to get a lot more track time with a Nitro than you do with an E-buggy. As a result, you probably won't get better as quickly as if you were to run a Nitro buggy as well. Overall though, if you want an easy way to get into 8-skill off-road racing, e-buggy makes the most sense to go for in the modern RC racing world. However, you want to think a little bit bigger, why don't we talk about e-Truggy and Truggy. I'm going to lump both forms of Truggy in one section, as what I say about one will more than likely apply to the other as well. In my last video talking about Truggy, I mentioned that the first Truggy was the GS Racing SUT, but this was incorrect. The first racing Truggy conversion would have to go to Native Racing and their truck conversion for the Mugen MBX5 back in 2004. After the Truggy class split off from the Monster Truck class and the Monster Truck class as itself died, Truggy became the main alternate class to buggy. And because this is during the rise of brushless systems and LiPo batteries, both e-Truggy and Nitro Truggy became around right about the same time. These days, in the US at least, they're still going strong. Well, at least e-Truggy is, but now that we got the general history out of the way, why don't we go over what a Truggy actually is, how they drive, and what advantages they have compared to buggies. Truggy is basically a stretched out and larger buggy. They're wider, slightly longer, usually more powerful, and use bigger tires. Sometimes you'll see them using different bodies too, but for the most part they are pretty much just bigger buggies. However, even with those small changes, Truggies drive pretty differently compared to their buggy counterparts. For one, they handle bumps, ruts, and jumps a lot better than buggies due to the aforementioned reasons. In fact, I personally think this is the entire reason as to why 8-scale Truggy, specifically e-Truggy, is so popular in the United States. Because US style tracks are much bumpier and less smooth than European style ones, Truggies have more of a place as the easier class to drive in the US, whereas in Europe, everything that makes the Truggy do well on a US style track slows it down on a European track. One benefit that Truggies really have over buggies is how long their tires tend to last. Even with the higher power of a truck and the higher level of grip gained from the larger surface area, Truggy tires somehow just last longer than buggy tires do. Overall, Truggies tend to drive better on bumpy tracks and are more forgiving to mistakes compared to buggies. There are, however, some drawbacks which I'll now list off. First off, the cost of everything is slightly higher than with buggies. Yes, the tires last longer than buggy tires, but they are a wee bit more expensive. For example, a set of TZO tires on A-Main costs right around $70 including tax. Truggy tires, on the other hand, cost more than $100 including tax, and considering how many tires one can accumulate over time, this can add up very quickly. Another slightly larger problem with Truggies is their durability. You see, the way that Truggies are usually built is a manufacturer will take a buggy and stretch it out without changing much internally, excluding techno. Also, because the arms and everything on a Truggy are longer and heavier, in a crash they will carry a lot more kinetic energy. Well, what this all means is that because the parts shared with the buggy are under much more strain, they will break much easier. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a Truggy shred one of those internal sun gears, especially on an old T3.2 from Associated. Also, if you happen to live in a place like Europe or East Asia, RC Truggies as a whole aren't really a class that's run, so if you're in one of those areas, tough luck. Overall though, Truggy is a fun class if you want to drive a car that will pretty much work no matter what you do to it setup wise, and at least for e-Truggy, I don't think it's going anywhere. And that's a brief synopsis of every 8-scale class currently being run in the modern RC world. If you made it this far in this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video as well. Any type of engagement helps. Also, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Raceline Designs for sponsoring this video. Like I said before, be sure to check out rldrc.com in the description below and let Tyrone know Roach sent you. Also, if you want to support me another way, you can subscribe to my Patreon, where I post updates and teasers as to when my videos are going to come out. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my patrons Michael Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, Dave Armstrong, Joe Jenkins, Rob Bedingfield, Caden Merks, Ian Petrie, Logan Jutkins, and especially Buddy Howell and Morrison Wad. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.